Well, folks, welcome back to Performance Process. My name is Ronan Laughlin, and this is the podcast that breaks down the processes behind the world's best performances so that you can more easily apply them to your own riding. I'm joined this week by Caley. Welcome back, Caley.
Hey, it's good to be back.
Long time no see on the show.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I'm a real high performance guy, so I've missed it. I'm back to help you make some small announcements is why I'm here. Because you and I have been talking about this.
We do have a full episode, a proper episode coming up with Robert Chung, inventor of the Chung Method, the virtual elevation method for aero testing at home. But before we do, we have a bit of housekeeping, as you hinted at there.
Well, so let's talk about this. So Performance Process is now just over a year old, right? And it's been hugely successful for us. It's a great podcast. We know that lots of folks love it, to the point where we're sort of ready to double down, quite literally, I think. So this podcast is about to go weekly, which is exciting. Ronan takes a deep breath. Oh God. Now I have to make twice as many.
You said doubling down. That is very definitely doubling up.
That's very true. We're doubling up. Yeah. So this podcast is going to be weekly. There's going to be some tweaks to some episodes. Like we may occasionally drop in some more kind of roundtable chat show kind of episodes. Myself, I might join. Alex might join. Some other interesting folks might join, just to talk about a topic in a slightly different manner. But most of the episodes are going to be very much what people are used to, sitting down with an expert in their field and kind of going through what they know with them, right? That's the underlying theory behind most of these episodes. That will remain the same. The show is also going to move to Wednesday. We just moved Spin Cycle to twice a week. It's now Monday, Friday, and so that made a little bit of a gap in our podcast schedule. And we're going to move this one to Wednesday. So look out for it wherever you get your pods on those Wednesdays. Is that it? I think that's it.
Yeah, I think like I know like we've a plan in place, and the focus of the podcast will be, I guess, even more so about how to improve your own training, how to improve your own performance. Looking at if we take that old cake, icing, and cherry analogy, looking at how to improve the fundamentals, training, recovery, nutrition, those things, the cake, so to speak, and also kind of looking at the icing and the cherry, because it's the icing and it's the cake that is the most important part. And so the getting that right is key, but then the icing and the cherry can get quite confusing, and which things are worth doing, which things are not. And this is going to be, we're going to try and break it down into actionable data that you can then, or actionable insight that you can then take away and apply to your own writing. As I said in the sort of tagline for this podcast, which I always alter in some way when I try to repeat it, but you get the gist. It's like trying to look at everything that goes into the best performances and how do we apply that to our own. And while that's been the focus so far, a big part going forward will be, should we even bother applying this to our own? Which parts of the processes are worth focusing on, and which are worth focusing on only if you're a full-time athlete with all the time in the world, and which is not most of us.
Today, we're chatting Chung Method, which is something that has been, I remember sitting down with Robert Chung in Specialized years and years ago. We did a pod with Specialized, actually, for the launch of the Venge, I think it was. And we sat down with Robert and we're just talking aero, and we're talking a whole bunch of other stuff. And that was, for me, the first time that I came across the Chung Method. And it has remained largely the same since then. This is like a decade ago now, almost. It hasn't changed a ton. Some of the tools have changed. Some of the bits have changed. But before we get into a nice, long, in-depth chat with Dr. Chung, we should start with what this is, right? Just to bring folks up to speed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a pretty good idea, because Robert, in the conversation we're about to hear, he had me thinking a lot. And his main point was like, there is no set protocol for this. There is no set format. There is no set test. It's basically, if you understand what goes into the virtual elevation method of testing, you can then chop and change it. For those who don't know it, it's a way to do aero testing without having to go to a wind tunnel or go to a velodrome, or you could do it in a velodrome actually, but you need a power meter, you need a speed sensor, one that mounts on the frame or fork and has a magnet on the wheel, and you need some way of measuring the ambient weather conditions, and you need a GPS head unit. After that, basically all you need to do is find a course that is suitable for the testing. Traditionally, that has been thought of as a short lap that you can do repeats on, but as Robert will explain, it doesn't need to be a lap. It doesn't need to be flat. You can do this on a rolling course, and in fact, it's kind of better if there's a slight roll to it. And the only thing you really do need after that is just sort of a windless day. Let's put it like that. And the idea is you can go out, you can do test repeats on your lap or on your out and back course. You can change things, like if you're testing helmets, you can do 5 or 6 laps testing 5 or 6 different helmets. You collect the data with your head unit, your power meter, your speed sensor, and then you get back home, download the file into a software platform called Golden Cheetah, and within that there's the AeroLab tab that you can then use to analyze the testing that you've just done. And the way that looks, or the way that works, is basically within that AeroLab section, the software, it knows your power output from your power meter. It knows the speed you were doing from the speed sensor. You input the ambient weather conditions, and then if it knows all those things, it can work out your rolling resistance and your aero drag, or your CDA. And then basically the way that's presented is there's an actual elevation plot of the ride that you've just done in the testing. So any undulations in the course will show up on that. And then there's a virtual elevation plot. And when you get the way it works is there's a sliding scale for both CDA and rolling resistance. And as you adjust those, you can bring the virtual plot for what the calculated elevation must have been for your ride. And once that gets to match the actual elevation, then for that test, my CDA was this. And if they don't match up, then there's basically the formula doesn't work with they don't match up. That's not my CDA. So you drag these little sliders across to get your CDA. And then if you run that for the various test runs that you've done, you can see, well, that one had the lowest CDA that matched the actual elevation profile. I don't know if I explained that well or not, Caley, but
can I make an attempt as a noted person who doesn't do this frequently? Can I make an attempt?
Doesn't aero test.
Famously does not. I famously do not aero test. On the long list of things that I do not do, this is right near the top. Let me try to break it down. We're basically solving for X, right?
Yes.
We're back in 8th grade. Yes. We have an equation. There's things on both sides. I'm also notably not a mathematician, so this is going to be really, really. I'm probably not using the right word.
Anyway. You are famously a podcaster, though. So
famously a podcaster. So on either side of an equal sign, right? You got either side of this equation. We have a lot of the information that we need that's on either side of this equation, right? We have how fast you went, and we have where you went, and we have the hills you went up, and we have, and this is crucial, the weather conditions. We have all these things, and we basically just keep adding data. We have to have all this data until the only thing left, the solving for X, is how much drag must have been present given all of the other factors that we have accounted for, right? That is the fundamental process here. And so the nice thing and the cool thing is that this Golden Cheetah, which again, I also remember using when I was a bike racer in like 2011 and too poor for training peaks, that has this all kind of built in, right? So as long as you're inputting decent information and decent data, the process for getting a CDA out the other side is actually relatively, I'm not gonna say simple, but like I could do it if I wanted to, right? As a noted non-mathematical person. So that's the cool thing about this, is that you, me, anybody could go out, and if we want to spend the time, we can make ourselves faster just by figuring out, position stuff and equipment stuff. And if you run enough tests, you can essentially, to dumb it way down, it's a wind tunnel without the wind tunnel, right? In a lot of ways. And I would say that there's even an argument it's more accurate in a lot of ways than like a wind tunnel, because you're actually out there, you're actually holding a position, you're actually doing all the things that you would really need to do in the real world. And then you get a number out the backside of it. And the fellow that we're going to talk to in a little bit, Robert Chung, is the man who developed it. And so he's going to have a lot more insight into sort of the tricks of the trade to make sure that solving for X actually works.
Named after him for a reason. He named it. He actually tried to name it something else, which he should have just ran with. But
what did he try to name it?
Virtual elevation. That's virtual elevation.
Chung Method is cooler. He's got a cool name, so like we're gonna do that, obviously, from a branding perspective, significantly better. Anyway, should we go chat with Dr. Chung?
Let's do it.
All right.
Well, it's only me, Caley. You can.
I'm out of here.
Yeah.
All right. Let's throw over to your chat with Robert Chung.
Welcome back to the Performance Process Podcast. Today, we're joined by Professor Robert Chung, who is a renowned researcher and data analyst who developed the virtual elevation method of aero testing, widely known as the Chung Method. Robert's work has made aerodynamic testing more accessible to the everyday cyclist by providing an affordable, relatively easy, and representative alternative to wind tunnels, allowing for accurate, repeatable testing using real-world data. I'm not going to try and break it out anymore, because that's why we have Robert here. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I want to say I have difficulty calling it the Chung Method. That seems a little, weird.
It's been called that for you, so it's okay.
Maybe I should refer to myself in the third person.
Or we could change it around entirely and call you Robert Virtual Elevation. Because the chances of changing the Chung Method name are a lot slimmer than changing.
Sometimes people say they're going out to do some chunging.
Yes.
And
Josh of Silka says that.
And so I just okay,
I think I've also heard Josh say, I'm going to chung the beep beep.
I'm going to chung the shit out of this. Yeah, I had to come up with the name Virtual Elevation. I did that in like 6 minutes because someone was calling it chunging, and I couldn't say that, so I came up with this name, and fortunately the name kind of stuck. But I have to tell you that my son said that was a mistake. He said, "No, Dad, you should have gone with chunging. You should have turn our name into a word." Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's I think that's happened anyway, because most people think of it as the Chung Method. Before we get into exactly what chunging is, can you give us a bit of your own background and your own cycling endeavors?
I just ride a bicycle. I mean, that's my background. And I guess the other piece of that is that I don't sleep well at night. And so I get up in the middle of the night, and I have a family, so I have to be quiet, and I can't be banging, or so I sit in a chair at a desk, and I think about things, and I have to be quiet. And that's how this all came about, because I was up in the middle of the night. So that's the background.
I can relate to that. I find myself up in the middle of the night quite often as well. And you sometimes find you get your best work done, maybe not middle of the night, but definitely very early in the morning. But I've never come up with something like the virtual elevation testing method. So there's a bit more to your background, your professional career, that give you the understanding and the skill set, let's say, to be able to come up with this in the first place. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I just retired.
Okay.
And those of you who are familiar with the academic world understand that it's not the most well compensated profession in the world. So I didn't have a lot of money, and wind tunnels are expensive, and even power meters. I'll actually come back to the history of this thing, but the power meters are actually used to be pretty expensive also. So I was using my skills as an academic to manipulate this data that you get from a power meter in order to do as good a job at estimating drag as I could. And it just turned out that worked out pretty well. I was kind of surprised. I still am surprised.
Yeah, I think I feel like we've skipped forward a little bit there. But I mean, I sort of hinted at it in the intro there. You're professor, researcher, data analyst. Is that which of those? You're a professor by trade, but you have a keen eye for data.
I am not. Many people think that I must be like an engineer or a physicist. I'm actually kind of a mathematician. I'm a demographer. I'm a mathematical demographer. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how much you know about demography, but we work with, we don't get to do experiments because we work with people, we work with data. And the data that we collect is observational, and it's often crappy. And so over a century or so, we were the original data scientists. And we had to work up how to calculate and estimate things based on really crappy data. So it turns out that the data that you get from a power meter and from a speedometer are so much cleaner than the stuff that I normally work with, that when I applied techniques that we do every day in demography to these data, the answer came out pretty well.
My understanding of a demographer goes as far as what I've heard you talk about on other podcasts. So I'm not very up to speed on that, but I think what you've just explained gives us a bit of an insight and gives us a good position to ask you just what is the Chung method or the virtual elevation method of aero testing?
You know this, that if we know your speed, and if we know whether you're climbing a hill, and if we know how much aero drag you're producing, if we know what your CDA and your CRR are.
CRR being your rolling resistance of your tires.
Your rolling resistance, your coefficient of rolling resistance. So if we know those things, and we know your weight, then we can predict we can calculate with high accuracy how much power you were putting out. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We've known that for a long time. And that's why things like Michele Ferrari's VAM measurements, he would say, you're going up this hill and there's a high correlation between your speed going up a hill and your power. So we've long known this. We knew for a long time how to calculate your power if you knew these other things. Mm-hmm. I just solved that equation backwards, and I know the power, so I calculate what those other things must be. Mm-hmm. And then what I did was I translated all of what those other things must be into a prediction of the hill or the equivalent elevation profile that you must be riding on. Mm-hmm. And then I said, oh, geez, I can compare that to the actual elevation profile that you're riding on. Mm-hmm. And then that puts bounds on what the CDA and the CRR must be. Mm-hmm. So that's it. I just solved that thing backwards. It's not really that remarkable.
You made it sound pretty simple there that I just reversed the equation there and figured out what CDA must be. But can Can you give us a bit of detail on what that math looks like? Maybe simplify it a little bit for us.
The math behind it is actually not that hard. It's almost entirely algebra. There's a tiny amount of calculus involved, but people always say they promised me there'd be no algebra. Well, it turns out, unfortunately, that this required some algebra.
On your behalf, you've done it for all of us. We don't have to do any of it.
We'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's actually one of the things on my checklist.
Okay.
Robert's referring there to the checklist that I had provided ahead of this podcast of stuff that we had to cover. That how many pages did it print out of? As there,
it was 4 pages, but the math behind it and solving it backwards wasn't that hard. That's what I have to do in my day job. But the trick about this thing, if you ask me, I mean, there's actually a trick here, which is that getting an answer or getting an estimate is just solving an equation backwards. That wasn't hard. What was, I think, kind of special is that I was able to translate it into something that made sense, which was the elevation gain. Mm-hmm. And that lets us give, if you take a look at almost all the other ways that they were estimating drag, in almost every other case, they're say, let's go find the flattest road possible, or we're going to do this in a velodrome, or we're going to do this, in as controlled a condition as possible. And then we don't have to solve for the elevation. And we're going to hold speed constant, so we don't have to calculate the acceleration or deceleration. Mm-hmm. And so they were doing things that would make the calculation easier. But it turns out that in that kind of situation, if there's any deviation from the flatness of the road, or there's any deviation in changing of speed, then you get errors. And those errors make the estimate less accurate and less precise. So the only thing I did was to say, okay, let's allow for acceleration. So I'm going to include that in my backwards calculation, and I'm going to allow for the road to change, and I'm going to add that into my backwards calculation. And that made the calculation much more robust to changes in the road that you're using and your need to keep the speed or power constant. And that's, frankly, I think why this works kind of well, because it acknowledges that people are not robots. Mm-hmm. And they can't hold a speed at exactly 40 kilometers an hour, and that they do accelerate and they do decelerate, and no road is completely flat. So I don't assume those things. I don't assume that you can hold the speed constant. I don't assume the road can be flat. I allow it to vary, and then I fold that into the equation. That's all.
Going back to the intro there for a second, like I had said, representative testing, real world testing, affordable testing, and that where all the other testing that existed was either not in the real world, or to eliminate noise or have a repeatable environment, or was highly constrained real world testing. What you effectively tried to do was embrace the noise. And what you then came up with was a way of using that noise to do real world testing.
Yes. So to go back to, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a physicist, I'm a demographer. We don't get to run experiments. We don't get to run highly controlled experiments. We don't get to say, we're giving you 1 extra year of education and we're taking a year. We don't get to do that. Mm-hmm. We don't get to say, we're giving you an extra, $1,000 and we're taking $1,000 away from you. We can only do observational things. And so the statistics that we do in demography are far more sensitive than the statistics you do in fields where you get to run experiments. And so that's where I come from, and that's what happened in this thing. I just said, okay, we're using the data that we collect, that we observe on real roads, outdoors, in imperfect conditions, and then we're going to statistically control for that. And that's and it turned out it worked pretty well.
So what is that data then that you need for Chung Method aero testing?
So you need to have accurate speed, and you need to have accurate power. You can't do things that I can't model. And that means basically at the moment, I mean, there are ways that I can do this, but at the moment, I cannot model when you hit your brakes or when you change your position on the bicycle, when you sit up, when you scrunch down, when you do something. So I actually do presume that you're not hitting your brakes. And I presume that you're holding your position. But the two main pieces are accurate speed and accurate power. And then the third thing, which really helps, is if you have some idea of the profile of the road that you're going on. And you don't have to have it be exact, but you need to have, it helps if you know what the difference between the lowest point on your road is and the highest. So you know that it's 5 meters, or if it's 50 meters. You don't actually need to know if it's 49.5 or 51, but you should know that it's not like 5 meters, that it's like 50 meters.
Okay, folks, that's where we're cutting off the free version of this podcast this week. Just a reminder, if you head over to escapecollective.com/member, you can sign up now and you can get the entire podcast uninterrupted. You'll not have me butting in to cut you off or to remind you that you're not yet a member. And in doing so, you will be helping to ensure this podcast continues for many more episodes and months and years to come. So head over escapecollective.com/member now to sign up to Escape Collective and to get the entire episode of Performance Process, along with all of the other podcasts and written content that we publish on our website.